Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 10 transfer plans. We'll be talking about what I'm supposed to do with Haaland, what my plans are at least, and how I plan to go there. Dealing with all the issues with my team, so Gabriel, Solanke, Dominic Calvert-Lewin in terms of their performances, Son and his availability, Dunk and his injury, what that means as well for my team going forwards, and a couple of other things since I have 2 free transfers. I'll be showing how my transfers are planned and how I have different sort of plans as well, and how they sort of operate in line with each other. And that also is dependent on some news that we might get later this week. We know that there's EFL Cup matches this week, so that's quite significant in terms of the minutes of certain players and what we can expect. We got an update on Gabriel initially, and it seems like it actually is a minor injury. And that was from the Arsenal source that actually confirmed that Saka was fit to play. So that seems like that's a nice source. I know he'll have scans tomorrow. Dunk apparently is also going to have scans. And we know that Son, as I said, is much closer. And we knew that this game week wasn't going to be great. So I'm sitting at 1.84 million in the world, basically 1.9 million in the world. Very, very soft green arrow, around 100k up in ranks. But that's that, right? 61 points. Some people did triple captain, some people free hit. Wasn't exactly a great game week after I knew Son was out. I knew that I was fielding a much weaker team than most people, but you kind of have to take that sometimes. And Flecken, of course, has been just an absolute disaster, whereas there's been other picks in the game who've been performing a lot better. So Wood, Cunha, etc. These sorts of forwards compared to the big doms that I have that have been absolutely awful across the board. And we'll talk about all those things in a moment. But we'll also be showing my transfer plans through the Fantasy Football Hub client, where they actually have a very, very useful My Team planner. They also have suggested transfers as well as sort of optimizations around, wildcard timings, suggested transfers that link up with chip strategy as well. So do have a look at Fantasy Football Hub if you want to have a bit more access into maybe planning ahead within your team, looking at the data so far in the season and seeing the expected points as well as per the AI models. Have a look at the link in description for that, with a 30% off deal up until the end of December this season. So anyways, in terms of Game Week 9, just quickly reviewing my team. As I said, it's nice to have a green for once. It really wasn't an impactful green, so that's that. I have to say, looking at the team, I'm pretty unimpressed with Flecken, but I still think that goalkeepers are a spot where you just sit and deal with them, right? Henderson, for example, was a player that we probably singled out a couple of weeks ago as playing for what looked like a really poor defense. They were still able to keep a clean sheet versus Tottenham. I have to imagine that even though Brentford were able to concede 3 goals to Ipswich, which is honestly really, really poor, because I think the XG for Ipswich was only sub 2, so clearly shows either poor shot stopping there or just really, really good ball striking as well from players like Delap, etc. But that's that. Flecken, very uninspiring. Leif Davis getting an assist is very nice, because I think prospectively in the few game weeks where I might be able to call up on him in the future, particularly in the next game week here in Game Week 10, he'll be very, very useful for me as an attacker. Now, it's very clear that he's not going to be able to get clean sheets. I think he's very much in that sort of Ryan Ait-Nouri camp where you're looking for purely attacking returns, hoping that they bail you out on those positive fixtures where they can actually provide some of those attacking returns, and very, very, very slim chances of clean sheets. And that could all line up, for example, within a game like, for example, Ryan Ait-Nouri had when he scored a goal versus Brighton himself. Double Man City defense coming in clutch was actually very, very helpful. I still think that I'm very confident about these 2 Man City defender picks, and I'm still very happy about how I tripled up over Man City over this period. I think it was the right way to target them, considering Foden's minutes overall over this run, and ultimately how good Guardiola and Lewis's minutes have been. Haaland has been generationally poor in terms of the captaincies. I think going back to Game Week 6, we were already losing in terms of all the sort of competing captaincies. I remember in Game Week 6, definitely we lost out to a Saka captaincy, but that was just 1 point. Game Week 7 was the really poor one here, where we lost out to Saka by around 14 points. So that really wasn't ideal. And then actually in terms of Game Week 8, I remember Salah clearly outscored. A lot of people, even maybe with Son captaincy, would have outscored as well. So another poor week there. And then this week, every premium has returned. And Mbumo, probably another popular vice captain, returned. Palmer with 3 bonus points. Salah with 3 bonus points. Even Saka, for example, 2 bonus points. I doubt anyone actually really captained Saka though. So the real competing options have outscored Haaland by a massive margin over the last 3 to 4 game weeks. And that's really felt incredibly brutal, to be honest, as a Haaland owner. And I still think that, as I said within my transfer plans video from last week, the plan to move towards Salah is still on the cards because of a few things. First of all, with Dominic Calvert-Lewin, I mentioned that I was a bit concerned that Beto could actually come in and start versus Southampton, but I still think that he's more than likely going to start listening as well to some sort of Everton fans and their sort of thoughts on Sean Dyche and what he sort of brings to the table in terms of defense, in terms of all that. Well, obviously, none of that relevant to FPL, but I think that Calvert-Lewin still play for Southampton, which I think is more than enough to say that he's still going to probably sit in my team if I have better moves to make. My plans are to go out of Haaland with 2 free transfers and to probably go out of Tyler Dibbling as well. This will give me another striker and another midfielder. So that means that, yes, Calvert-Lewin might play this week, but after that, prospectively, he's not going to be sitting in my team because I'll be able to play some other players as well. In the off chance that I do want to play Rodgers over Calvert-Lewin, I could do over the next 2 game weeks, but I still think that I'm unlikely to do so unless I'm like 100% sure that Calvert-Lewin is not playing, or if I can't play 4 defenders, that sort of thing. So I do think Calvert-Lewin's minutes are looking slightly more precarious, but I don't think that the start is going to be ruled out at all. I think it's very likely he starts. Yes, Wood has been so much better. Yes, Isak, even for example, has scored. Cunha has a great run of games and is already doing well in some of the poorer ones. And I think ultimately, yeah, the reality is that there are so many options for me to move into from the forward position, but I would still like to give Calvert-Lewin Southampton, and I'd still like to give Solanke, even though he's literally had next to no XGI, which is genuinely shocking as a center forward. I'd still like to give Solanke Ipswich at home, and then I can probably bin him after that. But I will give him that game at the bare minimum. We saw a team like Brentford get an XG of upwards of 4 versus Ipswich, and it just shows you, in my opinion, how many chances you're going to get there, regardless of where you really play on the pitch. So I do think Solanke is going to be given that game within my team. Otherwise, we have a couple issues. Gabriel seems like he's out, but I think the positive thing for Gabriel is that I probably wasn't ever going to play him versus Newcastle away or Chelsea away. So as long as he's fit and available for game week 12, which is 23 of November, that's many, many days away. I think that's more than enough time for Gabriel to recover. It seems like the injury was not some sort of a tear or sort of, MCL, ACL sort of issue. It did seem to be knee related, but I think it seemed like it was soft based on some sort of Arsenal reporting from what is known as now an Arsenal leaker in Connor, if you've followed him on Twitter. So he seems to have gotten some calls right, especially around Saka's time frame and things like that. So I'm going to have to trust, I guess, that Gabriel's fine for the time being. I'm not going to be exercising any free transfers for now because I still think it's absolutely ridiculous to do so when there's EFL Cup matches, and I still need a bit more certainty in terms of Son's availability, and I'll probably get that only after the EFL Cup match, seeing whether Son's going to be even a part of the squad versus Man City and whether that would change my moves. Because while Salah's going to rise tonight, I'm definitely going to ignore the price rise of Salah. I know some other forwards are projected to rise up in price as well, but I just really think I can't go anywhere up until I get more guarantees from my team, and that's going to be that. As I said, with Flecken, I'm going to have to deal with him probably, honestly, on the next wildcard. I think he's been absolutely shocking, and Brentford's defense, as we've noted in terms of the data trends, have been really poor because they've actually moved in the direction of being a much better offense, but actually a significantly worse defense, and that's not a good thing when we own a goalkeeper. So, however, I'm just going to have to lump it up. I think sometimes whenever we see really poor defenses play, they still have opportunities to get miraculous hauls. He could still, in theory, get penalty saves, and obviously the occasional clean sheet if it's ever possible for Brentford to do so. And that's that. With Haaland, as I said, my transfer plans are probably to move out of him, but it is still conditional on things like Gabriel injury updates, Son injury updates, and Dunk. I don't think I'm going to be playing him up until at least game week 13. So I don't really mind about Dunk being out, even if he's going to be out for a few weeks, because as long as he's fit for Southampton at home and that run of games after that, I think Dunk is actually a really good long-term hold, and I have no issues with keeping him in my team. So that's sort of the team state right now. One thing that I also thought that I would speak about is that -4 that I took for Palmer a few weeks ago. I feel like it's finally come good this week. Yes, of course, Bruno actually had plenty of chances versus West Ham. I don't know if you watched the highlights, but the Dalot miss was shocking. A couple other misses were shocking. He also could have arguably scored a goal as well. But it just generally feels a lot better to be owning Cole Palmer. And obviously, the opportunity cost there was that I lost Trent. What has felt good is that even though I did suffer in the first game week when I took the hit, Trent has actually been also conceding goals. He hasn't really produced anything so far. So that's felt good, whilst Cole Palmer has finally gotten 10 points here versus Newcastle. And I think that is a huge plus to the team. And I've gotten a lot of price rises out of that as well, which I think is really advantageous to how I'm planning the future. Prospectively, I'm actually looking at a team that actually has Palmer, Son, and Salah, which I think is actually very, very powerful. Considering that I previously owned Haaland, Palmer, and Son, and it hasn't really worked out too well, I guess. that's that. But Salah and the Salah versus Haaland swing has been quite brutal, because obviously when we look at total points, Salah's on 84 now and Haaland is on 75. And I think anyone watching the game or even the triple captaincy has to feel extremely hard done by Haaland, given the chances that he was actually given within the Southampton game. And I think it just shows you sometimes, of course, in FPL that it is slightly brutal, just the sort of, swings here in terms of whether Haaland can actually finish very, very high quality chances within certain games and what that means for the game week versus, once again, another flop basically with the Haaland captaincy. I'm not using this as a basis to say that I'm moving out of Haaland because he's flopped as a captaincy. I just generally think that I would like to spend more money in other positions, and ultimately dropping Haaland for Salah is a good way to do so whilst being able to actually use surplus funds in the future to upgrade my team. So if, let's say, Gabriel's out, I can obviously use surplus funds when I'm moving out of Haaland to another cheaper forward and Salah to upgrade someone like Gabriel in the future as well, or even someone like Leif Davis. And that's sort of what my plan is basically in the near to distant future. So that's going to be my team review for game week 9. Let's quickly jump into my transfer plans here with the Fantasy Football Hub client. So I'm here with the Hub client, and obviously if you're interested in having a look at suggested transfers from the AI, the use of the team planner, which I think is very, very good, really well integrated as well between both things, have a look at the link in description below. As I mentioned, there's a great deal in place, and ultimately the point projections, as I said, are still very, very informative. I don't use them religiously. It's not something that I would say that I use to just guide my moves like a Bible, but it's still helpful in terms of informing how, let's say, models are taking into account data, performances of players, and how things change as the narrative of the season goes on and as our understanding of certain players and teams develop. What I would say right now, as I said previously, is that Haaland is someone that I am comfortable moving out. And I do think that this is a good opportunity to move into Salah because the next two fixtures are potentially Salah captaincies. And a lot of this is dependent on Son, right? My gut intuition is that Son should be available for the Aston Villa fixture, and they've really been struggling without him. I don't know if that's going to be that important because Ange seems like someone who actually does take care of a lot of player fitness. And obviously Son's concerns about him feeling 100% are very, very valid at sort of his age. But I do think that Son is going to be available for Aston Villa and Ipswich. And whilst the model is a little bit more tentative, I do think that Son's projections should be a lot better as long as we know that he's available. But I can only wait until the midweek to assume that. So for the early portion of this video, I think I'm going to assume that Son is fine for Aston Villa at home, or at the bare minimum Ipswich at home, which means that he's going to be playable for me on game week 11. So assuming that I can put Son in the team, let's just assume that Gabriel can't play. Gabriel will be at the back of my bench. What I'll probably do is take a transfer out of Dibbling and take a transfer out of Haaland. Now, Salah's going to come into the team for sure. But the question, of course, is going to be, what forward am I going for? And I really wanted to go through all the forwards within the list here to potentially just discuss, what are the pros and cons of each striker that I'm looking at right now. The options that I'm looking at, unfortunately, because I'm closed off from Watkins. So if I just restrict this to show the amount of forwards that I have in terms of, I guess, money in the bank, I've got Wood, Cunha, Raul as my top options. I'm blocked from Wisa, unfortunately, because I'm tripled up on Brentford. And Darwin is another option. Darwin, I think, is only an option that I will consider if the Jota injury is long-term. I don't think Slot has confirmed this. It seems like a rib injury. That's not really the type of injury that I think that would preclude Jota from being able to play. And my concern is that if I go into Darwin, that's another book transfer in the future, when I actually want to be booking transfers out of Solanke and out of Dominic Calvert-Lewin as well. So both big Doms probably need to go sooner rather than later. And I do think that Darwin doesn't feel like a sort of tried and trusted transfer. Now, Wood clearly doesn't have a knock. I don't think that's going to be an issue at all. Wood has insane projections. He's clearly the most informed player in the league when it comes to the center forward position. I do think the fixtures are poor though, right, in the distance. So you've still got Arsenal, you've still got City, you've still got United, and then Aston Villa actually are seeming like a pretty competent team. Maybe United aren't a competent team. That's fair. I can take them off that list. But Aston Villa still really, really strong defense. I do think there's a lot of tough fixtures for Wood in the distance, and I'm actually not that keen on going for Wood. I feel like I've missed the boat on Wood. So if anyone's owned Wood, congratulations to you. He was one of those 50-50 choices between Calvert-Lewin, and clearly anyone who's gone for Wood, deserves the plaudits. He's been exceptional and a great finish on that first goal in that Leicester match. But I actually think that Cunha is the most interesting option in terms of flat out having good fixtures and really not having a single poor one apart from Fulham away. And still, that's still Fulham away. But otherwise, you've got Crystal Palace at home, Southampton at home, so many home fixtures. And then Everton, West Ham away, not exactly as bad as Fulham away. And then Ipswich at home in the distance as well. So I think Cunha actually has the best fixtures for the sort of price point. Raul, however, is probably the cheapest option that I can move into with still having tough fixtures in the distance. He's got Arsenal, he's got Liverpool, he's got Spurs, even Crystal Palace away, arguably a tough fixture there as well. So I do think that Raul requires rotation. And the interesting thing with Raul is that his rotation with Rodgers isn't exactly the best. For example, that Crystal Palace away fixture in game week 11, for example, does overlap with Rodgers' Liverpool fixture. So it's not perfect rotation, which is why I think even though Raul is probably the best value player right now, he's playing almost 90 minutes a game. I still think I can give him a pass in the meantime, except for the opportunity where maybe if I don't like Rodgers, I could move Rodgers into Eze in the future. So for example, if I make these transfers and I lock in, let's say, going Salah and Raul, I can make these transfers, I can optimize the team, and I can just move Son back into a starting position, putting Rodgers deep into the bench, and then obviously benching Gabriel as well. So playing Lewis over Gabriel, because I think Gabriel might not be able to play this week, which is, you know, something that could very well happen. Rodgers first bench, as I said, assuming that Son's ready to play. This would be the team that I prospectively play in the Aston Villa match, and I think it's actually a really strong team. Leif Davis has his premium best fixture here with Leicester at home. Lewis and Guardiola, I still expect to start versus Bournemouth away, and I'm really, really looking forward to owning these two players once again. And I think the rest of the team looks really, really strong for this week, particularly since Palmer is actually versus a United team that still look absolutely awful. So that's this team. This would be a Salah captaincy. This would definitely be a Palmer vice captaincy. And I think it's actually quite strong for this game week here. However, there is an alternative option where if I go for, let's say, a Cunha, then I can actually probably roll for the foreseeable future. Whereas if I go for Raul, one thing that I do really like about transfers is that I have enough money in the bank to go from Rodgers to someone like Eze. I still think that even though Spurs are a team that have been pretty up, pretty down, Eze is someone that I still think is very consistent. Yes, of course, he's not have explosive haul so far. Apart from, let's say, that one goal versus Chelsea where he sort of scored against the break of play and it was actually a really poor match. He still has the minutes. He's still on penalties half the time, at least, given Mateta's minutes. And even he could just take outright versus Mateta. I still think he's taking enough shots per game. I still think the underlying stats are good enough where I'm actually confident Eze as a pick for his price point. So Eze is an interesting transfer that I can do away from Rodgers in the not too distant future. And I actually quite like that, particularly if I think that Calvert-Lewin's minutes are precarious or if I want to bench someone like Raul. This gives me a full house of 8 players that I think have good fixtures, generally speaking. Whereas Rodgers is someone that, in my opinion, actually has some pretty poor games in the distance. And we talked about Aston Villa's poor fixtures in previous videos as well, which is why I've, for the most part, skipped out on, let's say, someone like Watkins in the team and considerations for someone like Watkins at that sort of price point. So that is something that I've been thinking about, you know, leaving room for an Eze transfer by going for Raul Jimenez, and I go for an Eze pick here, for example, in game week 11 instead. And if I make this transfer and optimize the team, it clearly sends Son out of the team. But I'm more than likely going to bench someone like Calvert-Lewin instead. And that's going to be the team. So that's one thing that I quite like, because Rodgers, I do think, is a little bit more unplayable over this pretty tough patch of games for Aston Villa. We know his minutes have been a bit precarious also because of his need to play within the Champions League matches. Sometimes he's putting 90 minutes there, which means that maybe he can't just be playing 90 minutes every single match as we've seen so far. So previously, I think a lot of people were concerned about the Rodgers minutes because of the knock, and also, you know, justifying that the only reason why he was rotated was because of that. But now we can see with players like McGinn coming back that there's clearly scope for Rodgers to be subbed off a little bit earlier, and that's not ideal in FPL. So that's why I like the idea of potentially opening up the Eze option by going for Raul Jimenez instead of any of the other forwards. Now, as I said, that's an interesting move, and I think I'm only going to look as short term as game weeks 10 and 11 because there's just so many cup fixtures in the distance, and by game week 12, I think I'm still comfortable with the structure, right? Salah still has the Southampton match. As I said in game week 13, owning Salah or Haaland doesn't feel too different from each other because Salah's still ultimately playing at home versus Man City, which I think is quite crucial. I might not even want to have owned Haaland in game week 12 anyways. I probably would see this as an opportunity to move Son back to Saka instead. And that's probably the generic move that I'm going to be making for most of my teams anyways. Hoping, of course, that Gabriel is going to be fit to play here in game week 12. So that's sort of the general plan that I have for my team. And Calvert-Lewin is someone who's going to be sitting as a sitting duck basically for a long time. So if I make moves here, I don't really think I need to optimize the team because I think it's already optimized. And then in game week 13, this is a window where I can reconsider going back into maybe someone like João Pedro, who could be reintegrated back into this Brighton team. Or I could also be looking at someone like Welbeck here at 5.9 if Welbeck doesn't rise too much, and I still have money in the bank available for that move. So I do think that in the not too distant future, I can definitely move back into Welbeck. And there's a little bit more rotation here where, of course, someone like Raul is someone that I can bench, given that I don't think Tottenham away is a particularly good match, and I can just play Welbeck instead here. And that would probably be how I plan my team here for Gameweek 13. So that's my moves if I go for the Raul plan. But what happens if I go for a move like Cunha? So if I go for someone like Cunha, clearly I'd be going Haaland out still. We're going for Cunha here in this situation, and we're going out of Dibbling into Salah. In this situation, once I make these transfers and optimize my team, Calvert-Lewin still playing. As I said, I'm going to be putting Gabriel at the back of my bench. I'm assuming that Son can play over Rodgers. This is obviously not optimized right now as per the sort of hub expectations, but I think they're just, as I said, taking a precautionary approach with Son and his injury. So that's the team. In Game Week 11, I think I actually have an opportunity to maybe roll, but this depends, right? I'm going to miss one of the Salah price rises, and I have an opportunity to move into Porro here at 5.5. So I think this is one of the moves that I can consider, and this would give me a much more stronger defense for the foreseeable future. It does mean that my team isn't going to be that great in terms of like the midfield position. Like Rodgers is going to be probably arguably worse than Eze, but it does give me opportunities to definitely play maybe a back four in the future. And it also, I think, gives me a little bit more coverage in defense whilst Gabriel and Dunk are potentially injured for my team. So this is something that I've been thinking about. If I go for Cunha instead of opening the option of Rodgers to Eze, I make my team a little bit more well-rounded by going for another defensive option in Porro here and also capitalizing on the Ipswich at home fixture in this circumstance. So I think this is something that I could look at as well. So when I move into Game Week 12, I think what I would do here is a little bit tricky because I don't necessarily have the amount of money to go from Son to Saka. Unless, let's say, Son gets another price rise or another 2 price rises and he does really well, for example, the next 2 games, Aston Villa and Ipswich, then I can't necessarily go straight to Saka. So that's a move that I would be 0.1 million off of, which is not ideal. But one thing that I definitely can do as a Son owner is probably take a little bit of a hit here, right? It's 2 bad fixtures for 2 players. Going out of Solanke and Son is something that I can definitely consider within my own team, and that would get me back into Saka within my team and also probably take me out of Solanke as well. This is something that I have considered, even though it probably means, a hit down the line isn't ideal, but going for another striker and forward at this point in time still makes sense. I could go for someone like Raul as well here and therefore just beef up another position like the Calvert-Lewin position later down the line. But this would be sort of one way to go about making moves around certain players. And I can obviously make this transfer here, optimize the team, and that would be a lot stronger of a team whilst capitalizing on Raul with a good fixture here with Wolves at home. So that is something that I've been thinking about, but a hit isn't something that's really ideal planning so far into the future. Potentially, of course, when I look at Game Week 11, the move about moving towards Pedro Porro, it could be something that I could reconsider, because if I don't want to go for the Pedro Porro move, or maybe I actually go for someone like Udogie instead, whilst also capitalizing on still those really good fixtures like Ipswich at home, or maybe even going for Dallo here in the situation where he's got Leicester at home, this could be one way to circumvent making that move, right? And then in Game Week 12, I've got more than enough money to go into Saka anyways, and Raul doesn't need to be purchased as an option, and I can still play Rodgers here versus Crystal Palace at home. So there's a couple of things that I've been thinking about in my mind, like looking into the distance where I probably will be closed off because of price. As I said, I'm not going to be pulling the trigger on the Salah move here, and Salah's going to move to 12.7. So clearly my team is going to be a little bit restricted from making the best theoretical moves that I've had to have a look at for now. But there's a lot of options as well. So it really just depends on whether I want to be spending money on players like Porro or Dallo, even going for the rotation of 8 attackers with Eze, wanting to save as much money for Raul just because it kind of optimizes other aspects of the team a little bit better, or going for Cunha, who just flat out has much better fixtures. I can easily bench someone like Calvert-Lewin, whilst I can play Rodgers and rotate with him and Calvert-Lewin as well. Another impactful thing, as I said, going back to my team, is just looking at my team here and just sort of refreshing ultimately what's going on. It does depend on a couple of things. So if I get news, for example, that Son is not available, I think my plan is probably to actually go out of Son instead and maybe go into someone like Eze, because I just think that ultimately a lot of people have no faith in Eze. His ownership's very low. I still think that he actually has really good expected points potential, and I still think that he can deliver on that, as he has, for example, within the Tottenham match today. And so Eze is a very simple transfer that I think is going to be pre-booked if Son, for example, re-aggravates his injury and I have to be stuck within the sort of Haaland team. Ultimately, owning Haaland for the next 3 fixtures is not that bad. Bournemouth away, Brighton away, and Tottenham at home are still good fixtures, in my opinion, to own Haaland for. Yes, I'll probably miss the opportunity on going for Salah and kind of capitalize on that captaincy there. But it's something that I'm happy to do, especially if, let's say, Son is out. If Gabriel is out, prospectively, a move that I can easily make is just going for Trent. So by going for Trent here, Eze and Trent, that is, I can optimize the moves like this, and the team will be a little bit more of a back four. I'll be clearly playing Lewis as well in this situation and probably benching one of Rodgers or DCL, depending on whether I actually have any confidence at all that DCL starts, which I think he does. So this is sort of a prospective team that I could be rolling out for this game week here, which would be to accommodate for Gabriel long-term injuries. And that would mean Gabriel missing the Nottingham Forest fixture on game week 12. And then also at the same time, sort of taking into account Son maybe missing Ipswich at home if, once again, it doesn't seem like he's managing this hamstring injury well at all. So that's sort of my generic plan, right? Strikers in, and ultimately there's a lot of options as well. I didn't mention Isak and I didn't mention Darwin. These are all the players that I can consider. As I said with Darwin, it's really Jota related. I don't think Jota's out for long. Isak is another forward that I haven't mentioned too much of. So the last transfer that I was really considering was that if I really wanted to maximize the full use of my funds, I could really go out of Rodgers and go into Isak as well. Isak is someone who still ultimately is on penalties, so there's always going to be a plus going to someone like that who's got guaranteed minutes and has better fixtures in the distance. Arsenal at home and Nottingham Forest away are clearly bad fixtures for Isak, but it's more about the long-term fixtures for him, where after those two games, I think generally speaking, most of the games are quite good on paper, or at least we have enough confidence in Newcastle and their ability to match up to some of the better teams, better than, let's say, some of the mid-table to bottom half teams. So that is an option as well, and this would still get me towards Salah, but it's very, very tight, and probably after this price rise, I don't think I have the option to go towards Isak, so that option is unfortunately probably closed for me unless Salah doesn't price rise over the next few days and I have a little bit more time to think about this move. I personally think it's way too tight. It also leaves me with a lot of options like Dibbling that I don't really necessarily want to keep going forwards if I move into an 8 attacker structure and I have, say, less confidence in Calvert-Lewin's minutes. Because previously, I think I had a lot more confidence in the minutes of someone like DCL, Rodgers, and Dibbling. And unfortunately, with some of the earlier rotations for players, Southampton still struggling as well, and DCL getting some sort of competition from Beto, that doesn't really seem as tight of a structure as possible. So going out of Dibbling first, I think makes a lot of sense for my team. Going for Isak feels like it's a little bit too tight of an option for me. So that's why I'm not that interested in this move. But a little bit of a longer transfer plans. There's a lot of options on my mind. I think the key thing here is that if all things go well, I would be going out of Salah and I'll be going into either one of Cunha or Raul Jimenez. And it really just depends on whether I have the confidence in Cunha long-term, which I think I definitely do, or whether I just really want to, let's say, move into a structure with Eze, with Raul Jimenez as well, which gives me a little bit more of a well-rounded team, a bit of an 8 attack team as well, and something that I can actually persist with very, very long as well in that direction. But clearly with more transfers booked as well and less flexibility compared to, let's say, the Cunha path, where because Cunha actually has such good fixtures himself, I don't necessarily need to book any of the other transfers in my team. I have options like Porro, like Dallo, etc., things like that. But take care, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. Hope you guys had a better game week than myself, and I'll see you guys soon for more content.